Three rides that should have been normal, and one of them took a road the map didn't even recognize. That's the part that keeps me awake. A turn the GPS didn't call out, a stretch of road that shouldn't have been there, and the quiet realization that the person driving wasn't following the route on my screen. He was following something else. All 3 nights had the same soundtrack: rain tapping the windshield, wipers scraping in a slow, irritated rhythm, and headlights carving out a tiny tunnel of visibility in the dark. But it's the silence inside the car, the kind that makes the space feel smaller than it should, that still sits with me. The first ride started like every forgettable late-night pickup. I was leaving a friend's apartment, the stairwell lights dimmed to save money, the hallway smelling like someone else's leftovers. My phone buzzed. Gray car, 3 minutes away. Standard, safe, routine. The rain came down harder. I pulled my hood up and stepped outside, already thinking about how fast I could get home. He pulled up under a streetlight and cut the engine the second he stopped. No idle hum, no rolling headlights, just sudden, heavy quiet. His face looked worn out in that way people get after too many 12-hour shifts. He held a paper cup like he needed it to stay awake. I got in the back. Seatbelt clicked. The car smelled like leather cleaner covering something older. My app showed the route, a perfect blue line to my building. And then, without saying a word, the driver pulled into the street and took a left the app didn't show. That's when the night stopped being routine. Maybe 5 minutes in, between the sound of rain hitting the roof and the hush of passing tires, I caught his eye in the rearview. Small, quick glances, not looking at me so much as through me, like signals being checked and rechecked. The mirror caught the angle of his face, his jaw tight, eyes moving in a way I would later recognize as someone measuring a risk. I felt a small, ridiculous bubble of defensiveness open. I moved my bag on my lap as if to hold on to myself. The route felt fine on the phone, but there was a tiny wrong tilt to the way we turned. Not a huge detour, nothing dramatic. It was the kind of subtle divergence you only notice when you're paying attention. An extra left where you expect a right, a block that slows us when the app's ETA had assumed a straight line. My stomach tightened into knots that had nothing to do with the rain. I told myself I was overreacting. The city taxis sometimes take weird shortcuts at night. Drivers are tired, it's late, it's nothing. Then he said it. Quiet, like he was confessing something sorry. "Did you see the guy sitting next to you?" It stopped my breath. I looked. The seat beside me was empty. The seatbelt lay over the cushion in the way seatbelts do when their last occupant has left. The only thing there was the faint indentation of a place that wasn't occupied, like the outline an invisible body had left on the fabric. "No," I said. I felt ridiculous for having said it aloud. "There's no one there." He kept looking in the mirror. The rain made everything smudge into watercolor. He said, "He was looking right at you." His voice was flat, like he'd seen something on too many nights to be surprised by it anymore. He didn't sound like he was trying to frighten me. He sounded tired and a little resigned. My hands found the edge of the seat, fingers spread to anchor myself. "What do you mean?" I asked. The car was suddenly too quiet, aside from the soft tick of tires and the staccato slap of rain on metal. "He was sitting there," he said. "Looked like he wanted something. Kept staring. I kept glancing. Thought you might feel it. I don't know." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't think he's here anymore." Those words, "I don't think he's here anymore," hung between us like an explanation and refused to settle. He wasn't saying the kind of thing that fit tidy categories. Not "it vanished," not "it was gone," but that half sentence that implied both observation and confusion. For a moment, the world inside the car narrowed to the mirror glass and the empty seat. I could have laughed, could have told him that late-night paranoia is a thing, that my brain turns on ghost stories when it's tired, but the sincerity in his face killed any mockery before it started. We didn't speak for the rest of the ride. If I looked in the mirror again, he'd glance away, as if he were embarrassed he had said anything at all. When we pulled up, I got out with my legs feeling like someone else's. The rain was still steady. I turned and left the door open long enough to look in the back, to prove to myself that there was no one there. The upholstery was only slightly warm where I'd been sitting. The seatbelt quiet. The driver watched me from behind the wheel as if he wanted to say more but didn't know how. That night, I found myself checking the back seat every time I climbed into a car. Not because I believed in ghosts necessarily, but because the idea of not seeing something that had been there, of another presence so easily missed, had dug into me. The ordinary act of riding through a city at night suddenly required more attention. I started to keep my phone face up on my lap so I could watch the route and watch the driver's eyes in the mirror. The next time I rode, I felt the ghost of that empty seat brush the back of my mind. If you like this kind of thing, stick around, hit like, and keep listening. I promise I don't usually start with such a vague line, but that night set the pattern for the next two. A few months later, my mother and I were waiting under the awning of a subway entrance. She'd come into the city to help me with something, a cabinet that wouldn't fit through a door, and the rain had started again, as if it followed me the way grief does. The app chimed, driver arriving, 3 minutes. The car pulled up, the lights carved out a clean rectangle on the wet sidewalk. She climbed into the front seat, I sat in back like I always do with her, old habits and a little courtliness that came from childhood. The driver was younger this time, hands on the wheel with a kind of tight focus. We were only a couple blocks from my building when the first sound came. It wasn't loud exactly, it was deliberate. 3 soft taps, like someone testing the wood of a table under their fingers. I thought at first it was the city, a loose grate, a cat on the curb. Then it came again, right under the foot of the passenger seat, a measured rhythm. "Don't tap back," the driver said without looking at us. My mother stiffened, her hand gripping her purse strap. She leaned forward as if to say something, then sat back down and closed her eyes. My mind leapt to ridiculous places, kids, a train, an animal, but those didn't make sense with the isolated, close sound, as if whatever was making it was right under the seat, aware of us. The driver kept his eyes forward, jaw tight. His hands were white on the wheel, in that way hands get when someone holds on for balance and for control. There was a familiarity in his voice, an old, practiced warning. He said, almost to himself, "If it taps, don't answer. That's the worst thing." He spoke like someone reading instructions he'd learned by rote. "What do you mean?" I asked in a small voice that sounded young in my ears. He glanced at me in the mirror, then almost immediately back down the road. "This is, don't make it worse," he said. He didn't want to explain, and I could tell he was choosing his words to avoid telling me something he couldn't fully explain. The taps grew more persistent, then paused as if the thing underneath were listening for our reaction. There was a difference between sound and intent in those beats. When nothing answered them back, they started again, but with a different cadence, faster, more insistent. It felt intimately close, like a human hand trying to decide whether the floor would push back. My mother sat completely still. I wanted to reach down, to put my hand on the place where the sound came from, but the driver's tone had made a line clear, "Don't." I remember the smell then, a faint oil and rubber tang that rose from the vents, mixed with the cheap perfume my mother always wears. The app on my phone showed the route, like nothing was wrong, a neat blue line, an ETA. It was almost jarring, this clean, sterile certainty of technology versus the tactile, immediate uncertainty under our feet. The driver told me, quietly, that he had seen it before. Sometimes it comes up under the seat. I don't know if it's an animal or... He stopped. His hands made small corrections on the wheel, thumbs rubbing against the leather. Once I thought I heard it breathe. I didn't want to look. His voice wasn't theatrical. It was the voice of someone reporting how they avoid waking a sleeping child. Soft, practical, careful. The taps became quieter as we approached my building. The driver slowed to let a bus pass, and in that soft, bright second, the sound under the seats stopped altogether, as if whatever was holding back had decided to stay silent. My mother and I stepped out before I realized I had been waiting for the sound to come back. She didn't complain about the rain. She only stared at the sidewalk like someone trying to see a scratch on the road that wasn't there. When we shut the car door, the driver watched us get out. His hands relaxed for the first time since we'd gotten in. He said, with a kind of exhausted gentleness, "If it touches the floor, don't touch it. Walk away." The words were more instruction than opinion, like safety advice from someone who'd learned the hard way. That night, I checked my shoes before going to bed. I turned on the lights and peered under chairs, under beds, as if confirming every floorboard might hide something waiting for a tap. I didn't sleep well. My mother told me later she had felt hands pulling at the hem of her coat, a sensation she couldn't place. We shared the memory, and it didn't make either of us laugh. It made both of us careful in ways we hadn't been before. Those two rides shared something. In both, the app showed an address and a route that made sense. Technology was neutral, functional, but the human element, the driver, that tired, watchful presence, was the one who noticed when reality shifted. He wasn't a hero, didn't offer dramatic protection. He was a witness and a guide who had accepted a small set of rules to keep himself and his passengers moving. Which brings me to the third one. This is the one the title promises. A route that doesn't exist. It was after a show, a small venue in the part of the city where the streets fold into each other and make strange patterns. I was late, like everyone always is after a show, and my phone had finally given up on being cheerful about my lateness and settled into resignation. I called a ride, the app beeped, and an ETA popped up. The route looked familiar, a straight line that threaded through avenues I'd driven a dozen times. The driver arrived, older, quiet, eyes that seemed to measure the reflection of the app's blue line like a foreign thing. I climbed in and told him the address. He tapped the screen, nodded. The phone in my hand showed the route, the ETA, the little pulsing car icon sitting obediently at the pickup point, like it, too, was ready for a normal night. At first, nothing was wrong. We merged into traffic, and the wipers kept time. Then, without a big moment, he turned onto a narrow side street I did not recognize. Not a shortcut so much as a slip into a seam of the city. I watched the map to see us cut across a block, to see the line keep pace. The blue dot slid along a path the way it always did, but the street grid on the phone ended a block earlier. The app showed pavement where my eyes saw only a shadow of a lane between two brick buildings. "Are you sure this is the address?" he asked, glancing at me in the mirror. His voice was careful, but there was an edge to it now, like someone noticing a gap in a stitched seam. The app insisted otherwise. The ETA didn't hiccup. The little car icon moved dutifully to where we were supposed to be. But the environment outside the windows had become quieter. Streetlights, sparse to begin with, flickered in long stretches, leaving rectangles of darkness between pools of light. The reflections in puddles were wrong, longer and thinner, as if stretched by something not quite like water. We drove through a strip that shouldn't have been there. Signs on the buildings were blank or bore names that meant nothing. One lamppost had a placard nailed to it with a number I didn't recognize. The next had no number at all. The GPS line ran like a river over a map that had no riverbed, and I felt the app and the street disagree for the first time in my life. "Sometimes the map doesn't show alleys," I said, trying to make a joke. The laugh scraped out small and brittle in my throat. He shook his head slowly. "No. This isn't on the app." He tapped the corner of his own screen, as if to wake it, and the car icon obeyed its rules and moved forward. In the rear view, he kept looking for confirmation, looking at the screen, then at the road, like someone counting to make sure numbers still had meaning. A fog slid between the buildings, not thick, but enough to dull sounds. The usual hum of the city, the distant music, a late-night vendor shouting, fell away into a soft static. The only sound was the rain and our own tires. I could feel my pulse in my wrists, in my temples. The map's ETA froze, then resumed, then told me we'd be there 5 minutes sooner than we should have been, as if closing the distance without moving us any faster. You ever seen it do this? I asked. It felt like asking a doctor if they ever bring people back to life. Awkward, a little desperate, absurd. He pursed his lips. Once, he said, not like this, but sometimes the city, it opens places that aren't on the grid. People call them shortcuts. I call them wrong turns. He had the kind of voice that suggested he'd kept this catalog of wrong turns to himself. For privacy or for self-preservation, I couldn't tell. We drove on. The lane narrowed. The buildings leaned in. Brick faces that looked back at us like closed eyes. My phone's screen glowed in my lap with the same fierce normalcy. The blue line ran clean across an empty block. The car icon moved as if on a rail. In the rear view, he kept looking for confirmation, looking at the screen, then at the road, like someone counting to make sure numbers still had meaning. A fog slid between the buildings, not thick, but enough to dull sounds. The usual hum of the city, the distant music, a late-night vendor shouting, fell away into a soft static. The only sound was the rain and our own tires. I could feel my pulse in my wrists, in my temples. The map's ETA froze, then resumed, then told me we'd be there 5 minutes sooner than we should have been, as if closing the distance without moving us any faster. You ever seen it do this? I asked. It felt like asking a doctor if they ever bring people back to life. Awkward, a little desperate, absurd. He pursed his lips. Once, he said, not like this, but sometimes the city, it opens places that aren't on the grid. People call them shortcuts. I call them wrong turns. He had the kind of voice that suggested he'd kept this catalog of wrong turns to himself. For privacy or for self-preservation, I couldn't tell. We drove on. The lane narrowed. The buildings leaned in. Brick faces that looked back at us like closed eyes. My phone's screen glowed in my lap with the same fierce normalcy. The blue line ran clean across an empty block. The car icon moved as if on a rail. But the lines on the map, those precise, geometric declarations of where you stood, simply ended at a straight edge. Beyond them was an empty gray that looked almost like fog rendered as pixels. There was a moment, maybe 20 seconds, maybe longer, where we shouldn't have been able to be somewhere the map did not allow. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. He slowed, and I felt the friction in the car like a held breath. "Do you want me to turn around?" I asked, because it seemed like the kind of thing someone would ask. In the light of his face in the mirror, I could see he was thinking of rules, fare, time, directions. He glanced at me as if he wanted to tell me something true. "No," he said, "not unless you want to get lost." His voice was flat, not unkind. When the map ignores a place, it usually means it's not meant to be tracked. People make mistakes going there. Sometimes the app forgets. Sometimes... He stopped. There was a small, private laugh that wasn't humor. Sometimes you come out the other side and both places remember different things. Best to let it be. I don't know why I stayed. Maybe because once you're in a car at night with the rain pressing the world into trustable pixels, it's harder to force yourself to be the person who hits cancel and steps into the cold. Maybe because there's a small, stubborn faith that maps are maps for a reason. Or maybe because the driver spoke as if this had a precedent, and the safest thing to do in the face of a precedent is to follow it. We threaded through that seam, and for a while there was nothing else to mark the moment but the windows and the soft thrum of the engine. Then, as quickly as we'd slipped away, we came out into a familiar avenue, the kind with metal newsstands and a row of taxis like a small army waiting to be hired. The app updated as if nothing unusual had just happened. The route history, when I checked later, showed only the neat, clean blue line from pickup to drop-off. There was no record of the alley, no gap, no pause. My trip timeline had no blemish. It was as if a little stitch of the city had been sewn into the narrative and then carefully erased. After I left the car, I watched the driver for a moment through the rain. He sat with his hands folded, eyes on his own phone, where the route history glowed. He didn't look surprised or relieved. He looked like someone who had completed a task he didn't want to think about. He said quietly, "Sometimes the map is honest, and sometimes it's not. Keep your head up." Then he drove away, tires hissing off into the normal parts of the night. I checked the app history when I got inside. It said we'd taken the expected route, as if reality had agreed to a tidy report. But the image in my head was stubborn. My memory held the bricks leaning together, the lampposts with no numbers, the way the fog had thinned the world. The map gave me a clean line. My senses gave me a seam. Both couldn't be wrong, and that was the worst part. The world allowing two different truths to exist, neither one declared more accurate than the other. These 3 nights have a common thread that keeps tugging at me. In each, the app, the clean, glowing logic of technology, was unimpeachable on its face. It told me where to go, how long it would take, where we were. But inside the car, something else was happening. An unnamed presence, a pattern of wraps against a floor, a road that refused to be contained by pixels. And in every case, the drivers were the ones who noticed first. They gave small warnings, offered terse advice. They didn't brandish explanations. They didn't insist on answers. They were witnesses, people who, for reasons of survival or habit, had learned to read small signs that the rest of the world blurs into background. I don't know what any of it was. I refuse to chain it to a single theory because resolution would steal the dread out of it. I have no map to put over these experiences that would make them sensible. All I have are the physical memories, the way the rain made sound against the roof, the mirror catching a glance, the seatbelt's metallic click, a pair of hands white on a wheel. Those are the things that feel real because they are tactile and because other people, who have nothing to gain by lying, noticed the same oddness in the air. The aftermath of all this is not cinematic. There were no dramatic confrontations, no exorcisms. There were changes in small habits. I check the back seat now before I buckle in. I keep my phone screen face up and watch the blue line. My mother walks a little faster when we cross the street. Drivers who tell you something in a weary voice get a little more of my attention. I carry an extra layer in my bag, the kind of practical, utilitarian response to the intangible. Be prepared, be visible, be cautious. When a world you think you understand shows one edge that is frayed or missing, it doesn't command you to believe it's haunted. It simply makes you notice the stitches. And once you see those loose threads, you can't stop looking for them. That's the quiet terror of it, not the immediate violence you expect from movies, but the slow, grinding awareness that the maps we trust don't always cover every inch of the terrain. Sometimes the city keeps secrets in the small seams between streets. Sometimes someone else notices them before you do. If any of this feels familiar to you, if you've ever felt a presence in the back seat, or heard the soft, deliberate tapping of something under a passenger's feet, or found your GPS behaving like it was politely ignoring a strip of the world, tell me in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one who checks the back seat, who watches the mirror, who flinches at a tap. If you liked these stories and want more like them, like and subscribe, and share your own late-night rides that didn't quite make sense. We spend a lot of time trusting tiny, glowing rectangles to tell us where to go. Sometimes they lie by omission. Sometimes the people in the front seat can see things the map does not. And when that happens, it helps to have witnesses.